sound working for you. All right, so everyone, welcome to the Left Forum. Thanks for joining us because it's very early, at least for some of us, it's very early. And so today's discussion is on the topic of fusion and building independent political power to challenge Cuomo's conservative class agenda. And so my hope was, before I introduce the panelists and the panel, that I would like to hear who's here, and maybe your name and maybe your affiliation, so that we know who we're talking to.
Well, perhaps if there's anything you're looking to get out of this workshop.
Yes, exactly, as well.
Detail or something.
Yeah, why are you here? So, you want to start over here?
Well, I went through the list and I wanted to choose something. I wanted to go to different panels I generally wouldn't go to. I don't know much about Cuomo's conservative agenda. I tend to follow foreign policy, so I want to see.
Especially regarding what he said regarding fusion lately, because I know the Green Party, we're getting away from fusion entirely. So I was just wondering, what the legal aspects are and how things might be changing.
My name's Terry Maroney. I'm a member of the Green Party. I'm here to videotape it for my public access TV show.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay, I'm Connie Benson. I'm a member of the United Federation of Teachers. I'm from New York, right here, Manhattan, which is why I know my way around this maze. I am a member of the Democratic Party, but I have to tell you I was very impressed with Dr. Jill Stein last night. And my husband is formerly a member of the Greens. I mean, we oscillate back and forth, so I have a lot of, and I've been a member of DSA in the past. For those of you who know Democratic Socialists of America. So, I mean, and my husband was actually speaking about a Green New Deal on a panel this weekend. So, I mean, we have very close political affinities, but as a member of the United Federation of Teachers and as a public school teacher, I'm very upset and feel betrayed by Cuomo and his education policies, extremely betrayed. So I'm really here with an open mind.
And hopefully if we miss any details on education policy, you can fill in the gaps for us. And in the back?
My name is Dave Duncan. I live in Binghamton. I'm with a community newspaper. I'm interested in economics of the state and locality, and how Cuomo has managed to turn a huge amount of public money into private hands. And I am very interested in appealing to public service employees who so far have taken very little stand about anybody taking public money. So we have less teachers, we have less everybody in the public sector, and they've all been quiet.
I'm Jack Baldwin. I'm a Green. I'm involved in a number of groups, Occupy Pipeline, NYU Divest, etc. And I'm in this panel not only because I want to hear the Greens speak at the forum, but also because I want to examine strategies for dealing with Democratic politicians and also Democratic voters, particularly disgruntled Democrats.
Great. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And so I'll introduce this panel now and the panelists and myself. Basically, we brought this panel together because the Cuomo administration has a fairly conservative economic program, but the mainstream and basically the liberal establishment kind of ignores it because of how liberal the Cuomo administration is on things like gay rights and women's rights. And a big challenge that we face is this idea of fusion, which we say fusion breeds confusion because we have groups like nonprofit groups like Citizen Action and the Working Families Party that legitimize basically the conservative Democrats by basically getting out the vote for them, offering critical support. And myself, I feel like I know a little bit about this topic because before working with the Greens more actively, I was working with the Working Families Party. I worked with the Working Families Party on and off on a couple of campaigns back in 2009, and basically saw firsthand that it actually is a paid-for canvas operation for Democratic Party campaigns. Democratic candidates basically say, okay, we need to knock on this many doors, we need this many numbers, this many man-hours of door knocking, and come on, WFP, get out the vote for us. That's kind of how it works. I mean, there might be some politics as well in terms of arguing about issues, but basically they're for hire canvas operation. And I say that they give the Democrats street cred among progressives and kind of let people get away with voting for the lesser evil. And so the question we want to examine is how and can we build a progressive alternative that's independent of corporations and corporate rulers? Because, you know, how can you be on the left and also voting for people that take piles of money from corporations and from the Koch brothers, for example? So my name is Ursula, and I'll be making sure our speakers stay on time, and then I'll be moderating the Q&A. And so to my left is Mark Dunley. Hi, Mark. This is Mark Dunley, and since our first speaker isn't here yet, Mark will be going first. And Mark wears many titles and has been active with the Green Party really since the beginning, since we formed in New York State. And one of his most illustrious positions right now is with the Green Shadow Cabinet as director of the White House Office of Climate and Agriculture. And Mark is also on the Green Party New York State Executive Committee. And on my right is Cecile Lawrence, a woman also whose many accomplishments I can't list right now, but she's based in the Binghamton area, or Broome County. In Tioga County, excuse me. A longtime activist in various movements for peace, for single payer, very active in the movement to ban hydrofracking in the Southern Tier. And she has run for office with the Green Party a few times, including in 2010 for U.S. Senate. And she's also a PhD and a JD, so a very accomplished woman as well that we'll be hearing from. And our speakers that we're still waiting on are Howie Hawkins and Mayor David Doonan of Greenwich, New York. So we'll let Mark go first now, since Howie and David aren't here.
And how long am I supposed to speak?
You get 10 minutes. And do you want some kind of a warning?
Yes, give me 2 minutes.
You'll get a 2-minute warning.
Okay. So Howie was supposed to be here to talk about the broader issue of fusion. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that, but assuming Howie will be showing up. I'm going to focus more probably on some economic justice issues. For the last 28 years, I've ran a statewide anti-hunger organization and have also been very involved at the state level with a lot of the coalitions around progressive revenue issues with groups like the Fiscal Policy Institute and New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. Just briefly on the issue of fusion, it's a strategy of, can one move a political party like the Democrats in a more progressive direction by basically co-endorsing their nominees. And we would say that the Working Families Party is a good example of showing why it does not work. And a lot of people will argue, well, the Working Families Party has had tremendous success in New York State. How can you make that argument? The nation in particular loves the Working Families Party. And I always say, well, please tell me what the Working Families Party has actually accomplished. They are a very effective get-out-the-vote operation. They're probably perhaps the best get-out-the-vote operation in New York State. And increasingly, they've gotten themselves in trouble because they sell this get-out-the-vote operation to the highest bidder within the Democratic Party. And people may not remember that the initial strategy of the Working Families Party to get power in New York State was the strategy the New York Public Employees Unions have followed, which is to keep the Senate Republicans in power. And one of their first efforts at winning was basically to keep the Senate Republicans in control of the state Senate in exchange for trying to increase the state minimum wage. And the person they ended up defeating was Andrea Stewart Cousins, who's now actually the Senate Minority Leader from Westchester. and they in fact co-endorsed instead the Republican candidate from Westchester, Nick Spano. I don't know if Nick's gotten out of prison yet, but he's one of the long line of people who the Working Families Party who has endorsed who's ended up in prison. Howie will go into more detail with that. The other issue I will say that the Working Families Party has had some role on was the Green Jobs, Green Homes campaign, which I thought was a good provision, basically to try to energy retrofit up to 1 million homes by allowing people to finance through the utility bills. I think it's a very good idea, and I think actually they deserve credit for getting that to pass. Unfortunately, it's not been implemented very well at all because of real opposition to the pro-corporate energy forces that dominate both initially the Patterson administration and now the Spitzen administration, particularly at NYSERDA and the Public Service Commission. And so instead of getting 1 million homes energy retrofitted, we've maybe gotten a few hundred. But that's been their big victories, those two issues. And I do not think that's really a tremendous sign of power. In exchange for that, 2 years ago, they decided to cross-endorse Andrew Cuomo for governor. After Andrew Cuomo publicly say, I disavow your agenda. I'm going to attack public employees unions. I'm going to attack unions. Unions are the problems with our state. I'm going to promote an austerity budget. And if you want my line, if you want me to take your line, sit up, shut up, and sit down. And that is what they did. And they did that so that in order to be, the only way you can create a political party in New York State is to get 50,000 votes for governor. And they decided to nominate a candidate who opposes every issue, largely, that they support as a political strategy. And we say that was wrong. It's very helpful to Hunger Action, to the Green Party. It would have been much more of a challenge to the Green Party with Howie Hawkins to have gotten 50,000 votes if the Working Families Party actually ran a progressive candidate, but they decided not to. So I just want to quickly run down, some of the issues. One of the big issues that a lot of us have worked on for years was the issue of progressive tax reform in New York State. The janitor who works for Donald Trump pays a much higher percentage of their income and state and local taxes than Donald Trump does. And we've been trying for years under Cuomo 1, under Pataki, under Spitzer, under Patterson, under Cuomo 2 to resolve that. And we've not really had much luck with that. The one thing about 3-4 years ago when the state was in particularly fiscal crisis was we did pass a millionaire's tax. To take a step back, the tax cuts that were enacted beginning under the last years of Mario Cuomo cost New York State about $20 billion on an annual basis in lost revenue. And what we see with these tax cuts is the politicians from both parties push these tax cuts for the wealthy at election time, overwhelmingly to people who make a huge amount of money, and then it creates huge budget deficits. And so when the state has $1 billion or $5 billion or a $10 billion state budget deficit, and I believe we had $10 billion the first year of the Cuomo 2 administration, the solution that's put forth by Andrew Cuomo and by the Democrats is not to rescind the tax cuts that they have enacted for the wealthy in order to raise the $20 billion of revenue that they have lost, but rather than to cut funding for human service programs, for schools, for housing, for health care. And that is what we saw, where when Cuomo came in, he opposed continuing or extending the millionaire's tax, which was set to expire. It was about a $5 billion on an annual basis. He refused to comply with the lawsuit which people had won on the school finance and education. And he made cuts across the board and disinvested in a lot of programs. That was the Working Families Party agenda, basically. We did actually finally get a small extension of the millionaire's tax because Cuomo made a major tactical mistake and he picked a fight with Occupy Albany. And in Albany, everybody knows Occupy Wall Street here, but in Albany, there was actually a very, very small city park, which those of us who do demonstrations for years has known about, no one else knows about, across in the state capitol. Everybody assumes that all the property surrounding the state capitol is state property. But this was city property. And so basically the governor thundered, "Throw them out!" And it was, well, Governor, it's actually city property. And the district attorney says he won't prosecute if we pull them off. So we can pull them off all day long, and they'll just keep running right back, and the district attorney won't do anything. So he picked this very, very public fight with Occupy Albany, who up until that point, I don't think really probably was very, very much focused on Governor Cuomo, but now they were. And they began to call him Governor 1% and did all these demonstrations in the state capitol, and it was a fun, fun time. And Occupy Albany was able to change the political dynamics so that finally Cuomo had to agree to extend, I'm going to take a few more, to extend the millionaire's tax. So I only have 2 minutes left, and I have 18 other issues to do. One of the things when Cuomo came in, we had fought for many, many years to raise the basic welfare grant. Basically, it was a 3-year deal to raise the basic welfare grant by $1 a day for a family of 3, or $30 a month. He came in with the last 3 years, the third year of the last year. The welfare budget is the one part of the state budget which is awash in money. And I can go into more details about that, but there's actually $1 billion plus annual surplus in the welfare budget based on how the block grant was created, fixed funding by Clinton and Gingrich, and the fact that caseloads have decreased by about 60% since 1996. So the difference between what we pay out in benefits and what we get in the federal block grant is over $1 billion a year. And the state ends up using that as a slush fund to provide fiscal relief to the counties rather than funding for job creation and stuff like that. But it was a relatively small amount of money that was involved in the grand context of things. I forget the exact number, maybe $15 million, but he tried to cut it in half. So instead of giving people an extra $1 a day for a family of 3, we wanted to give them 50 cents a day. And we eventually were able to defeat that, but we had to wait an extra 6 months to get the extra 50 cents a day. The tax cut, maybe how we would go more into that, but one of his things when the governor came in was to impose a cap on how much schools can raise local property taxes. Not only did he not comply with the need to increase funding for education, particularly in the urban school districts and then in the rural school districts and school districts with poverty, but he also wanted to cap how much you can raise local property taxes and put that into effect, and that's been a real problem across the state. His most latest scheme is the tax-free New York proposal, which is just incredible. One of the things that my organization has worked on, particularly after they repealed what they called the old ADC program, Aid to Dependent Children, and we said, and they talked about the need for individual personal responsibility if you're going to receive public subsidies. And we said, well, that's a great concept. How about repealing the other ADC program called Aid to Dependent Corporations? And if you want to talk about individual responsibilities, if you want welfare moms to work 35 hours a week in order to get a benefit package that keeps them at 50% of poverty, why aren't you making the CEOs work 35 hours a week doing public service in exchange for the hundreds of millions of dollars that we're providing them? And so we have demanded over the years with limited success that if we're going to spend literally $6-7 billion a year in corporate welfare packages, that there actually be some accountability for that money. That the companies that receive these economic development grants should have to demonstrate that in fact jobs were created. and that the jobs that are created pay living wages, and that the companies actually comply with labor laws and environmental laws. If you've been fined, for instance, by DEC, if you've been fined by the Department of Labor, you should not be eligible for tax subsidies. And probably also set some limits on the value of the job created per dollar invested. Some of the packages they have done in New York State have literally invested $1 million per job. And I'm like, well, you can just give them a check for $50,000 and that would go for 20 years. You're spending $1 million to create a job that may pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And then you don't actually, document that that job has been created. And if they promise 150 jobs and they create 5 jobs, if we're a nonprofit building subsidized housing and you give us money to build 150 housing units and we only build 5, we're in jail. And you have, you shut down our organization. These corporations getting this type of money, you hold photo opportunities with them, after you do this. And of course, they're doing all these campaign contributions. So we finally get rid of the most egregious program, which was the Empire Zone, which was during the Pataki administration. And that at least initially was to provide economic development if the jobs were being created in a low-income neighborhood. And so say this is the low-income neighborhood, and this is they're going to create the jobs. And every year, they would just draw that circle bigger and bigger. Oh, any place in the county, any place in the region, they're sort of eventually at every place in the state. So eventually we got rid of that. So what does Cuomo do now 3 weeks ago? Tax-free New York. This is a new level of absurdity. So not only is it still corporate, smokestack chasing. I know, I got to finish. This is the big finish. Not only are they giving them an economic development, they're giving them not only no taxes, say for 10 years, if they somehow are connected to a college, like we don't already have enough corporatization of colleges in New York State. The employees don't have to pay any income taxes, which is unheard of. So we can go through that. Bad deal. I want to stick one more in. You also screwed us on the minimum wage, which my organization is always the first group that works on the state minimum wage because we feed 1 million people each month at food pantries that are the working poor. And once we raise it, eventually we get enough clamor that the big boys come in, the unions and stuff like that. If I had time, which I don't, I could go through the whole history of how bad this minimum wage deal was and how we got sold out by the Working Families Party and by the unions. Sold out isn't quite the word. Screwed is probably a more appropriate word. But one, it was very clear throughout this process that the needs of workers were sacrificed to the partisan political needs of the various parties that are involved. And that they try to use the minimum wage as a way to regain control of the state Senate last year for the Democrats, at the same time when they gave away the most important thing they could have done a little bit level field, which is that, who's that guy? Cuomo and Silver, the Speaker of the Assembly, agreed to gerrymander the Senate Republicans. So if you wanted to use the minimum wage as the wedge issue to retake control of the Senate from the Republicans, why you would then gerrymander to deal in the opposite direction. Cuomo at every step of the way did whatever he could to kill the minimum wage increase. Last year we had 80% public support. 3 weeks before the legislative session ended, Cuomo declared the issue dead. Well, I can't get Dean Silver and the Senate to negotiate with me, so it's dead. 3 weeks before the session is over is when you start to negotiate. What do you mean you're declaring it politically dead when there was 80% public support? Cuomo did a very good job on same-sex marriage. There was never 80% support on same-sex marriage, especially among Republicans. 2-to-1 Republicans supported increasing the minimum wage. So why did you fight so hard on same-sex marriage, but threw the minimum wage off the table before it was even dead? So we got really upset, and we sort of pointed out, well, actually, Governor, you don't need the Senate Republicans to raise the minimum wage. You have administrative power under the state labor law, section 653, to raise it administratively with nobody's approval. And we did the petition process. Initially, he denied that he had the power. oh, that's an anachronism in the law. When Rockefeller changed the way we do minimum wage back in 1960, he didn't rewrite the law to get rid of this anachronism. And we said, yeah, he did not. And so the law is on the books, and you have the power, and you can exercise the power. So he didn't do that. Then everybody agreed we were going to do the minimum wage post-election, mainly because while Cuomo was saying that he wanted to trade the minimum wage hike to give legislators a pay raise, in reality what he wanted to do was to give his own staff a pay raise. So he used the legislators as a cover to try to trade his pay raise for his staff for the minimum wage increase. But because of all the scandals that completely erupted, they couldn't do it. So he, at the last moment, said, I can't do the minimum wage hike because of Hurricane Sandy. So we're not going to do a post-Sandy thing. Then, of course, the Democrats won control of the state Senate. Except for those 4 Democrats who were cross-endorsed by, what was that group again? The Working Families Party, who went out and created the Independent Democrats. Every single member of the Independent Democratic Caucus was nominated in the most recent election by the Working Families Party. Didn't they ask them what you're going to do sort of post-election? Because everybody knew there was this whole power thing. So, but thank God the Independent Democratic Caucus said the only thing that we demand in exchange for giving the power to the Republicans is that you raise the minimum wage. So we said, done deal, we're going to win it. Then Cuomo comes out with his bill, which is 25% higher than the Assembly, and but he takes indexing off the table. Frankly, I don't think indexing was that important because it was so low that we want indexing at $12 an hour, not indexing at $9 an hour. But he took the biggest issue off the table that the Senate Republicans fight all the time, is to kill indexing. So because he took it off the table, they were like, I don't have to fight that issue. So indexing we don't have to fight. Let's do a phase-in over 3 years. And then bottom line, we ended up no indexing, a phase-in over 3 years, and then out of nowhere, at the last moment, besides we also excluded the tip workers, we ended up with a $40 to $50 million annual tax credit for companies that hire teenage workers. And what the state was going to do is pay the difference between what the new minimum wage will be and what the minimum wage teenagers will be receiving. Unprecedented. Never done in New York State. Never done in the United States. So Walmart's going to get like $30, $40 million a year off of this. They're going, well done. New York has done it. Why can't we get, I don't know, California, Massachusetts, Maine, so now they started this whole nationwide movement. Plus with this tax credit, you only get the tax credit, if you hire teenagers. So even though most minimum wage workers are adults, now you've created a financial incentive to create teenagers, and you only get the minimum wage tax credit if you pay the minimum wage. So if you want to give them a 5 cents pay raise, 10 cents pay raise, you lose the entire tax credit. So now they built in a financial incentive not only to hire teenagers, but also to keep them exactly minimum wage. And I could go on, but I'm 20 minutes over. Thank you very much, Ursula, for allowing me to speak.
Thanks, Mark.